Hello and welcome back to the Erin Cruz Show. We have on with us Joseph Grcar, and he ran for the 2018 race, California State Assembly, District number 20, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Number 20. We want to get an update from you. We had you on the show last week, Joseph, and we talked about some of the issues, some of the hurdles, some of the things that you've learned and taken from this experience. But you also wanted to share with us your experience of Election Day and night in terms of what you witnessed. Thank you for coming on the show. We can't wait to hear from you.
You're welcome. Well, since I was personally involved, I wanted to go and see the votes actually being tallied. I thought I would use this as an excuse for that. So I went down to the county courthouse on election eve and then again on Monday of this week to watch the progress of the vote counting. And it's quite an impressive operation. I have great respect for the people organizing the thing. Alameda is a pretty big county. We've got on the order of, I think, 500,000 votes this year. So that's a turnout of about 60%, which is good.
Which is what we're seeing, right?
Yeah.
I think along the lines of California and even other states is exceptionally high for midterm.
Right, yes. And it takes a bit. You have to talk to the people to find out exactly how the process goes, so I can explain that to you if your listeners are interested.
They would love to hear it. I know a couple of people were really excited to have you back on the show and hear about that, because this is something that the media doesn't talk about a lot. And obviously schools aren't teaching about what goes on. And most people think they vote and, 1 minute after the bell goes off and the polls close, that's it. Fox calls that Newsom wins when Cox has a higher percentage rate. All of that kind of shenanigans happens. But that's not the real world.
It doesn't work that way, no. First thing you have to realize is that most of the people vote by mail these days. So I think only in this election, only a quarter of them actually go to the polls and vote. And if I'm one of the poll voters, because I just like to participate and actually see what happens, and since I'm retired, I can go in midday when there's no crowd. But
no line? Awesome.
No line. And I get to visit the elementary school, and all the little kids were lined up there watching the voters come in and getting a civics lesson.
That's wonderful.
So the important thing to note about voting in person, first off, there's only a quarter of the votes are cast that way. And in California, there is absolutely no check on whether the person coming to vote is actually the person who is registered to vote. You do sign on this little book, you sign your name in there, but nobody checks your signature. So anybody could walk in and vote for you instead. So that's 1/4 of the votes. Most of the votes come in through the mail. They're early voting if they arrive before Election Day, and then they're technically called late votes if they arrive after Election Day. But in California, so long as the ballot is postmarked by Election Day, it counts. So quite a few of them do come in afterwards. They can go up to 3 days after the election to arrive. And at the county courthouses, where this is, which is the epicenter for all these ballots, you can watch what happens on election night. So I can explain how that works. Basically, the Register of Voters folks are working very hard to pre-count the mail ballots that come in, because they want to get as much of the backlog out of the way as possible. So at election night, when the polls close, they press the button on the machine, and it finally adds up the ballots that they've already pre-scanned, the mail ballots. And when you hear on the 10 o'clock news who has lost or won the election, it's entirely from the mail-in ballots that they've been able to get to by that point in the evening. and none of the votes that were actually cast at the polls have been yet counted. So then
they haven't arrived yet. I mean,
they haven't arrived.
Still
yes,
at the facility.
yes,
wherever it is that they're being, the votes are being cast.
right. The votes that are actually at the polls take about 3 hours to get to the county courthouse. They have fleets of vans that visit the precincts. There are about 800 or so in Alameda County, and pick up the materials and deliver them to the courthouse. You can see a long line of vans wrapping around the courthouse, and they're all bringing in the ballots.
Something to see. Did you take pictures of this event?
I wish I had. You can take pictures outside, and inside
Right.
told us no, but then
Right.
on the other hand, down in Broward County, Florida, they are taking pictures, so I'm not sure.
Well, I'm glad a few people took pictures, but, they also weren't within, certain confines of rules and other kinds of things.
Right. So the important thing is the custody of the ballots. The chain. You want to make sure that you know where everything came from, where it went, and that nothing gets slipped in, which could be an invalid ballot. So the Register of Voters waits until everything has come in, all the conditional or provisional ballots that might be cast at the precincts, and any mail ballots that they've collected, people can drop them off. And those are all stored away under lock and key. And then they finally start counting the ballots that were cast on election day. And in fact, they, in a sense, are already counted. They're recorded on tape. And the only thing that goes into the courthouse is a little tiny cassette tape that has the ballots from each precinct, the record of them. And they're put into machines that do the counting. The ballots themselves go to a warehouse somewhere in the county where they're stored for almost 2 years in case a recount is needed.
I think they need a very, very, very audacious audit.
I'll tell you where that comes. So I think, for the ballots that are cast.
Let's get back to the. Okay, so we have these big vans. They're all lined up. They're coming to the courthouse.
Sure.
It looks like a chain of hot dogs, just big white hot dogs. They're waiting. They got all this precious cargo in the back.
Yes.
They're coming to the courthouse, but are they delivered then with their respective cassette? Is that what I'm hearing that you're saying?
No, the ballots are separated when you read them into the machine. This is the way it works.
I see what you were saying. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify from earlier. Okay.
That's right. Ballots go into a big bin at the bottom, and they are collected, those bins, and they're carried to a warehouse in Oakland. Right. And they're all bundled up, and it's tracked where they came from in case anybody has to go look at the actual ballots. And all that comes into the courthouse in a red suitcase-like thing is the tape from the precinct, along with the book where people have signed their names, because that's part of the record of the election.
Right.
And these are inserted into the Register of Voters computer system, which reads the votes that have been recorded there and then adds them to the official tally. And all that process finishes about 2 o'clock in the morning. So they release by 2 o'clock the ballots that have been cast at the precincts, plus the early mail ballots that they've gotten around to counting. And then it takes a long time to do all the rest of the ballots, the remainder of the mail ballots and provisional ballots that have been counted at the precincts.
Right, they have to confirm, and they have to compare and make sure that somebody who cast a provisional ballot didn't vote in person by mail or any other way.
Yes, right.
More than once.
And the time-consuming part of that is checking the signatures on the outside of the ballots, the provisional ballots or the mail-in ballots. So those are checked against a computer system that the Secretary of State operates that contains the signature you wrote down when you registered to vote. And the comparison criteria is that there should be one significant feature of the signature that matches, like it could be the way you write the initial of your last name or the initial of the leading character of your first name, something like that. So it's not a very strong comparison, but it is a comparison.
So in other words, if you haven't registered or re-registered to vote in some time and you notice you're getting a little sloppy with your handwriting and your signature has changed, it might be a good idea just to go revalidate your registration to vote and update your signature card.
You could do that, and because there's a central repository for all voter registrations, the Secretary of State operates this. It doesn't matter how many times you register to vote; they'll keep track of it and make sure you are only registered.
You're not registering twice. You're updating your registration.
Right, and if you go to another county because you changed your residence, then they'll figure that out and they'll delete the old registration.
Or you can just confirm it with contacting a registrar. But I think that's an important note to make, though, because, sometimes over time, either, sometimes people get sick or they break a hand or they, whatever it might be in their life, they get older, their signature changes. It's something that people should take into account, especially if they're concerned about their vote counting. Just do everything you can to make sure that you're responsible.
Yes, right. And you can also, by the way, look online and type in your name and say, have you gotten my ballot, my mail-in ballot, and did you accept it? And it'll say yes or no. There's the Register of Voters in your county, and also the Secretary of State has a website for that. So if you're a mail-in ballot person, I would suggest doing that for this election too, just to see what happens. The important thing, though, is all of these mail ballots and provisional ballots, they're divided into 4 categories, okay? The first one, this is with the signature check and all that. The first ones are the ones that are good to go. So then the envelope is opened up, they're put into the scanners, and it's counted, okay? The second batch are the ones that go to remake. Okay, now that sounds kind of ominous. If you
it has a procedure to it, but they literally do.
Yes, they do. Yes,
and it goes your ballot.
And why does this happen? Well, it could be that you went to the wrong precinct by mistake, or you live in Berkeley but you work in Fremont, so it's easier for you to stop in at Fremont and try and cast a ballot, and they'll let you do it. But then you're going to be casting one of these provisional ballots. It's going to be looked at. And all they have in Fremont is a Fremont city ballot, not a Berkeley city ballot. So you have to take whatever you put on the Fremont ballot and remake it on a Berkeley ballot. And of course, you won't be able to vote for certain things because certain names aren't on one that are on the other and such. But the remake is, from my observation, quite a few go through remake. And then, of course, some people just spill ketchup on their mail-in ballot or their coffee stains on it.
Or sent in the mail. That's another common reason. The Secretary of State actually has an entire policy that they follow, or they say they follow, when they come in contact with ballots that need to be remade. And there is there's a classification and criteria for each situation and instance.
Right.
And it's at their discretion.
It's one person reads the old ballot and then another person marks it, and then they switch positions and they read them again and check it, and then it goes to a supervisor to make sure that it's all okay. So there's quite a few checks in there. But on the other hand, it's not that the parties or the political parties ever supervise any of this. So these are clerical workers at the Registrar of Voters, not any supervision by courts or by political observers. There are also a group of ballots that go into the yellow box. They're flagged by the Secretary of State's computer system as being ballots that have to be looked at in more detail. So I couldn't get a straight explanation for what these were exactly. It could be that...
Are those the undervotes or overvotes, or people who've written on a line item?
Undervotes and overvotes are things where you've voted twice or you haven't voted at all. That comes when you actually look at the ballot, but we're still looking at the outside of the envelope. And the Secretary of State's computer determines that some ballots are yellow, and so they have to be examined more carefully. And finally, there are simply invalid ballots, and that's the red batch. And those are not counted. The envelopes are not opened at all. Whereas I'm not quite sure what's done with the yellow ballots, but there's some investigation of those. Nothing
at
is.
least they're looked at. They're examined.
At the outside.
This red, right. But this red batch, what happens to them and what are they?
Well, for example, it could be that you are, the Secretary of State's computer might say that you are registered to vote in Los Angeles. And this is a polling place in Alameda County. You can't vote here no matter what they may have given you a provisional ballot to fill out, but it does not count. Okay, even though the governor's race is on all the ballots, they will not count anything. If you're registered out of county, then your ballot goes into a red bin and it's not looked at. So I think that, entirely reasonable. You should know what county you're registered in, but that's what those are. Now, what I find interesting is that there's no way to find out how many red, yellow, green, or blue are the ones that are good to scan, come up in any polling location. So one poll watcher from a campaign who was very interested in the outcome because there was a close race here, he said, well, the red ballots, those could be people who actually are trying to cast fraudulent ballots.
You don't know.
Yeah, you don't know. They could walk into a polling station, they could give completely wrong information just in the hopes of getting a hold of a ballot that they can fill out. They might write the name in some clearly inaccurate way. I think you have to put your birth date on there. They might have the birth date wrong, something like that.
Well, the provisional ballots have an affidavit. It's pretty comprehensive.
Right. So there's a lot of information to check that could flag the ballot as being something that can't be counted, right? But they don't actually give the statistics on how many invalid ballots were turned in or filled out. And I think that would be an interesting indicator just to let you know, what's the error rate here?
Well, they should be providing all of the data is the way I see it, is every ballot taken in, every ballot counted. And it doesn't matter what it meant in terms of what the contents were. Everything should be allocated and have its space for reporting, because that was the one thing when I ran for United States Senate I found peculiar on all of these updates that I would receive, was they would talk about, okay, we have approximately this many, mail-in, this many provisional still left to count, approximate, and the target date which they thought that they would be finished. But the one number that they wouldn't talk about were the hand count, the rewriting, the hand count, and then the invalidated. They never told you that amount. And for me, when you have a tabulation of all of these votes, 1 + 1 is 2. Okay? 1 + 2 is 3. You don't have 1 + 1 is 3. Where'd the other ballot go? I mean, really, it comes down to just giving the information to the public so we could see it. Transparency.
You can Google estimated unprocessed ballots, and that'll bring up a PDF file at the Secretary of State's site, which every day is updated, and it contains the vote by mail, the provisional, the conditional, and quote other, whatever that is, and then the estimated total remaining ballots for each of the counties. That's one thing to look at, but it does not break it down, as you say, further into actually invalid ballots, into flagged yellow ballots. And I think that would be very illuminating if they would do that. And then you can see the other thing. So is there voter fraud? Well, I don't know what's going on in Florida. I don't think that in California, or at least in Alameda County, that you discover a pile of ballots in the closet, because it seems like the custody of the ballots is pretty well taken care of. Once they're removed from the polling place or they come in from the mail, then they're under lock and key and they're watched. But the thing that could happen is you could just have a lot of people go out and turn up at a polling station and say, oh, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to vote, but I want to cast a vote. Okay, that's a conditional or a provisional ballot. And if that somehow gets through the system, if you're good at faking a person's signature, you might very well cast ballots that are illegal that way, and they would get through the system. And since there's no indication of how many of these red bin and yellow bin ballots are actually encountered, you don't know if this is a widespread occurrence or if it's just very rare. I mean, I saw quite a...
How many did you see?
Well,
how many could you gather you saw in comparison to some of the others? You know, I mean, was it something that it stood out to you and you thought, oh, wow, that's enough that we kind of should know what's going on?
It could have been on the order of 5% of all the ballots. No,
which is enough to swing a vote.
Yeah, by the time certainly a close race, by the time I got there, they were only counting provisional ballots. So all of these are a little bit dicey to begin with, right? Mm-hmm. It's people who didn't vote according to the way they should have for whatever reason. So that's a pretty big error rate, actually. But it would be nice to know those numbers. Then the other thing, so in Alameda County, this is, I give them credit. Every day they turn out the vote count for all the races. Mm-hmm. So they started on the morning after the election. That was initial vote count. And then every day at 5 o'clock, they issue a unofficial results, okay? And you can track every race and see what's happening. Not all counties do that, so it's very nice that they do in Alameda. But here's the curious thing, okay? The fraction of votes for a Republican candidate only goes down. If you're a Republican in a race with a Democrat, your fraction of the total vote in this election in Alameda County, it only goes day by day. There's 13 races where you have a Republican against a Democrat, and the Republicans generally drift down, and the Democrats generally drift up. And so if there happens to be a close race, well, they're going to cross at some point, and then you flip the winner from what was announced on election night. And I spoke to some of the candidate reps who were at the city hall or the courthouse, and they said, well, that's because Republicans vote early. So they tend to be a little more Republican in the initial vote count, the early mail and maybe the election day. And then the late mail ballots are going to be more Democratic. But I don't know that Republicans are special people. I mean,
everybody's busy. Californians are busy, right? I mean,
you should see my garage. My garage is a mess. Okay, I'm a Republican, but I'm not neater than the Democrat who lives next door. So I don't necessarily buy this that Republicans vote early and Democrats vote. Maybe they do, but it's just strange that in 13 races, the fraction of votes given to the Republicans, all 13 of them, goes down, and the fraction given to Democrats goes up.
Well, the reason why I find that interesting and actually somewhat problematic is when we look at the sampling, because at the very end of the election, after they're done counting just about everything, if you have voting machines, what they do is they take a sample vote. They take 1% of the vote. Right. They compare the electronic votes from the machines to a canvassing 1% sample, just to make sure that the numbers are representative, to confirm that the machine is not faulty, if you will. And that's just a 1% sample. And if they're expecting, some sort of a shift, Republican-Democrat shift, some of them vote where... Some of them happen to live where all the machines are versus where all of the paper ballots are. I mean, the idea behind that would be that the machine wouldn't be a representation of the same, in the room as it would the mail-in ballots and the provisional and everything else from the canvas. So because they didn't even finish that until, they don't even do that until supposedly the very end.
very end. It's a bit of a red herring, though, because all you're doing there is checking the machine. Did the machine scan the ballots properly?
Well, they're checking the sample to make sure that the algorithm isn't flickering and that it's representative, that it's
It's not,
matching.
right, and it is adding things up properly,
Mm-hmm.
but it's, and it has to match exactly, or they have to find out why. So uh, I think, though, that the potential for gaming the system comes in these many provisional ballots that are tossed in, and there doesn't seem to be any statistics on them. Um, I just wish I had a little more
Well,
information.
we don't have information except for what we read, and what maybe the poll observers or the even because the not the poll observers, but the Election Integrity Project actually sends people out. They watch and they can watch the entire process happen. But what those tallies are, that doesn't necessarily mean that they know that. They're just watching the process to make
Right.
sure that nobody's doing something
Right.
that they shouldn't be doing necessarily. So I think that I would agree with you that the concern is that what if during that confirmation of those provisional ballots, that process, there's a human element.
Well, yes, that is a concern, and exactly how
I mean,
they.
you could have the human element have an issue, and you could also have the computer algorithm have an issue or a computer issue.
Right. Well, also, I mean, I don't want to impugn the voters or the workers in the courthouse, but I mean,
Well, of course not, but
let's face it. This is an overwhelmingly Democrat county, and do they really care that much if a Republican vote gets changed? I mean, if I were just a poll worker, I would, you know, not care all that much, honestly, because you know that the Democrat is going to win in the end anyway. So I can imagine that there's this sort of a mindset that says, oh, well, it can go, this can happen, and it's not really a biggie. And every Republican in California has encountered this, prejudice that you get from the Democrats, and I can see where it seeps over in little ways into the ballot counting process. But my main concern, though, is that you don't really know ultimately where the ballots are coming from. And particularly this thing about walking in and just being able to sign and no checking whatsoever, not even against the computerized value. I think a good thing to do actually would be to take 1% of the ballots and check the signature in the book against what the Secretary of State's signature is and see if the signatures match. I think that would be interesting. But they don't check the ballots cast on election day at all. I've seen people come in also trying to cast provisional ballots in my own polling place, and these people looked out of place. I mean, I'm in a certain socioeconomic demographic, and the guy who was trying to cast ballots was clearly not from the community. And
right.
joy.
Which in many cases, I don't know specifically where you live, but in neighborhoods where I've lived at, it's generally, for example, one neighborhood, it was in somebody's garage. The polling
Yeah,
place was in a garage that the community comes together, and it's everybody you know. And in some cases, it's a
right.
smaller community, and everybody, of course, is mindful of the rules and everything. But if it's somebody who's not from your community.
They don't look.
It's very clear.
Most people, and this guy was way too well dressed and way too well spoken to be a member of my community.
Well,
so it was just stuck in my mind that there was unusual. And I wonder if other things like this go on. So.
It could very well, I mean, it's all speculation, I guess it would be. But it's interesting to talk about because it's something that, a lot of wondering, quandary, tension comes about when especially, we have a lot at stake. We just watched that the Democrats are going to push to how many billions of dollars are they going to be spending now? They've decided. I mean, it's a lot of money out of our pockets, and there's a lot at stake. And to see that there could be potential for fraud or
Yes.
you just want to know that it's an honest vote. We're
Yeah.
America, and have the checks, have the balances, make sure that everything's done right and well, have spot audits, make sure that things are in order and that the public feels secure about their vote. Because when the public feels secure about their vote, they're going to vote. When they
Mhm.
think their vote doesn't matter, they just doesn't matter. Why should I?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And we all should participate. So it's really, I think, interesting to hear what you're saying. So now, after all of this, because I kind of want to get back to these vans, the red bins, the yellow
Yellow.
bins, everything's done. What next? It's just that all of these things get put away in storage,
Yes.
and
Everything is stored for 22 months until they have to throw it away to make room for the next primary election, which would be in almost 2 years. So you could, recreate everything by pulling it all out of storage, but you wouldn't know. I mean, it wouldn't do much more than count the ballots you've already collected and decide. So,
so how was this experience for you? I mean, did it give you ease of mind, or do you have some concerns? I mean, how did you walk out of this thing? As a man, as a citizen of the United States, who ran for office and cares about the country. I mean, no, I'm serious. You're laughing. I really want to know.
Let's not get into that. Okay, first off, basically people only vote for their party as near as I can tell. So you have almost no chance of really moving a county like Alameda one way or the other.
Right.
I'm not 100% confident of the way the votes are counted. It seems to me that they'll let me in there and I can look at the stuff and I can talk to the supervisor, but I can't really figure out what individual people are doing. And particularly when it comes down to verifying the signatures on the mail-in ballots, which is the really big thing, mail-in provisional, I have no confidence in that whatsoever. Also, I think it would be very easy to just, fraudulently vote a number of ballots. You could send people out to different precincts, have them fill out provisional ballots, and I would expect.
Or drop in mail-in ballots. There's so many people who complained about their mail-in ballots missing.
Exactly. Right. Then you have even less to deal with the poll workers. So. I'm not entirely confident of that. I would feel better if everybody had a memory stick or had a chip in the back of their head and they had to be scanned when they cast a vote. But I guess we don't want to do that for
let's not give the government any more ideas than it has the ideas to do already. You're telling them they can spend more money and do something to us. Yeah, no.
The tech companies are already chipping up their employees, so it's going to for the rest of us too.
Well, I am concerned about the provisional ballots. I'm also concerned about the mail-in ballots, the ones people say they haven't received, and then they have to go vote provisionally, right. Or they show up thinking that, well, it didn't come in the mail. I signed up for permanent mail. Where's my ballot? And they say, well, you don't have a ballot here. Well, where did my other one go? Is that waiting in a bin somewhere?
Right. Yeah, for example, if you're talking about the 1% check, another 1% check that would be really useful would be to call all the people and say, did you actually mail a ballot in? And, was this your ballot? That's a 1% check too.
Mm-hmm. Well, they do, there are a segment of those ballots where they do contact the individual, and the individual has a certain number of days to respond and verify their signature. There is that. I don't know that they actually do call them. I would hope, and I would trust that they would do their job and be doing that. But that's not out of the scope of what they can do. I mean, in terms of if you're looking at the integrity of the vote, there are a lot of different ways that can happen. I know some people want a voter ID. Other people want, I've heard some individuals saying, well, why can't, DMV has our thumbprint, why can't we just use that, and have that sort of thing as far as tracking and validating. There's a lot, I think, that could be thought about in terms of securing the vote and confirming the actual person who logged that vote. But it all comes down to figures don't lie, but liars can figure. Or something like that.
That sounds
I mean,
is that
it just, you hope humans aren't corrupt or corrupted or corruptible, but, I think that it would be good for California specifically, I mean, with how large we are, to have a comprehensive system where we do check, and we have another system to check these things, because the IRS audits.
Yes, right. Right.
And I know everybody, they just want it done and they just want to vote, but these things take time, and it's the future of our republic. So
Right.
now, well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I mean, it's certainly rounding out your experience as a candidate.
When you think of it, I'm probably one of only 50 people in the entire county who has ever gone down to, and this is a county of 1.6 million people, who's ever gone down to watch the votes being counted. So it's a very, very small fraction of the people who actually see this, and I found it very interesting to do it.
It's important to do it, and I'm glad that you did, and that you were able to share it with us, because it is such a valuable part of our republic and everything that holds us up as a country. And people don't understand the complexity behind it because of Fox News and CNN.
Right. Yeah, the whole mail-in ballot thing, although it makes life very easy for lots of people, it adds enormously to the complexity of voting.
And the movement for fraud, because
yes.
The United States Postal Service is the guy in between.
Yeah.
And they need a bailout, and who's going to give it to them? Let me just ask, because I'm trying to.
Every time something gets complicated, the possibility of ginning the system goes up.
Right.
So, I'm beginning to think that, everybody can manage to go and actually cast a vote at a polling place. That might be a better way to do it, but I probably wouldn't win that argument.
Well, in the olden days, they had a paper ballot, and they went and they cast their vote.
Right, right.
And I know there were a lot less people, but we also have a lot more people to help count. So, and this is a very important part of our, the way our country runs. And if there's one thing we do right here in the United States of America, it should be getting the vote right and retaining our liberties and our freedoms, because in almost every other country, I was watching one, really quick, I was watching one special, and they said, the United States is an interesting place, because where our taxes are concerned, we tell the IRS what we think our dues are, what we need to pay. And then they come back and say, okay, yeah, you're right. Or they say, no, you need to get more. And in the case of the vote, we have now seen more corruption and fraud in terms of what we think is fraud, but we're not sure. But historically speaking, we have a lot of strong integrity in our election system and our process, being a republic, especially on the federal level. I mean, it has, with the Electoral College and other checks and balances, it's so secure, if you will. So many other countries are corrupt and have mass amount of fraud, and I mean, it's just it's the nation's going to chaos, literally. So we have to secure that.
Yes, right.
So what cost is too high? I don't know.
Exactly.
So, and I'm not for big government, you know that. So, what do you have to say to our listeners about the process and about your experience as a candidate as we wrap up here, in closing, to share with them, because people have really enjoyed hearing your talks.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I wish I had more experiences as a candidate. I mean, all I could do was to walk my neighborhoods and go to some street fairs. You've heard the story about that one. And introduce myself as a candidate. So I got to speak to a lot of people and hear views, pro and con. I wish that I had been able to debate with my opponent, but that doesn't happen.
Didn't happen for a lot of people with
No,
incumbents.
if it's a Republican against a Democrat in California, they'll never schedule a debate. Only if it's two Democrats who are competing for one of these top two race slots. So that I guess is one of my big regrets. And then the other regret is that it's so hard to communicate to large numbers of people unless you actually do it in person by walking. The newspapers are almost non-existent. There's your interview, and I had a blogger who did an interview with me. There are a few others who will do interviews. But I mean, honestly, you're not getting the same audience that ABC, NBC,
I think we reached about 40,000 people with your interview, but it's not targeted.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think with all of them and all of the sharing with everybody who shared it, I mean, you can't look at YouTube which says 40 because by the time it gets to 70, the next morning I wake up and it says 10. They lie to you, but I have Google Analytics. And we know based off of the programs we use that we reach, with myself and our other team members, we reach quite an expansive audience. But again, this is national and actually worldwide, so 40,000, 30,000 people, it's not in your neighborhood necessarily.
It's targeting that's the key, and that's what's hard to do. In California, in the assembly districts, you can see, the problem basically is that they're too large to personally walk, and they're too small to be a single media network or a single media zone. So you can't really reach your audience any reasonable way. I think that the legislature in California must be vastly expanded to make the districts smaller so that you really can walk a district.
You can have proper representation in your communities. It's absolutely, I agree with that. Again, if we want to get government under check, there's some places we need to adjust for the population and adjust accordingly for the vote and other things and spend the money in other areas where we're going to save a lot. And I do think that needs addressing, and I'm so glad you brought that up in both interviews because it's important, and you now know firsthand.
Right, I've seen it. Yeah, it really is. If we had a larger legislature, I hope that the special interests would not have enough money to contribute to every one of them. They can contribute to all 40 state senators, but if they had to contribute to 120 state senators, they might not be able to influence them.
They would start being spread thin, and the other thing is it's harder to lobby such a big body, and then you also open up for a lot more competition. And the community also has a lot more input in terms of what their representation is. And we also talked about different oversights for the regions or the districts and having proper oversight, because that's another issue is the non-gerrymandering that's happening and some of these other, redistricting things, fiascos. We have to get back to, citizen-run government where we're really, the people are involved.
Yes, we do.
Have a voice, so.
I'm going to sum up by saying one thing. They say that you think it's a platitude when the president or any politician says that you have to win your freedom. Every generation has to do that again. And I can see that it's really true in California, for example. There's a lot of the way the state is operating that is not really representing the people. And we have to bring it back or it's going to continue to go the wrong way. Very soon.
Well, thank you again for sharing, and thank you for coming on the Erin Cruz show. And don't be a stranger around here. If you get involved in your community again, we want to hear from you. And I'm sure, 2022 comes approaching along, I'll be in your area and visiting and whatnot.
Oh, I forgot to announce I'm considering running for president.
You are?
Yeah, my congressman is doing it too, so I think I should also run as well. So I'm waiting for him to announce, and then I'll announce. How about that?
Wow. You know,
Yeah, me and Eric Swalwell can finally debate.
wouldn't that be fabulous?
Yes, we
I
can
mean,
start right here in Contra Costa in Alameda County.
I mean, why not?
Right.
Why not? I mean, yeah, I'm so done with these incumbents. They're just so egotistical and arrogant, and they're not
Right.
any better than you or I. You know, I'm an equalist.
Well, I hope that you'll be running in the future sometime
I
again.
am 2022.
Okay,
So we're
great.
already fundraising. So
Oh,
I'll be traveling up there, and I'm running against Kamala Harris. So I'll be traveling up there, and I'll come and say hello and check out Alameda County, and maybe
you might.
walk by the courthouse.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you might have an open seat sometime too. You know, you never know. So if you need someone, please contact me. I'd be happy to work on your team.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and thank you for stepping up and running for assembly. It's a large task, and certainly one that's helped us gain information and knowledge. So thank you for sharing.
Okay, great.
All right,
Thanks.
Joseph. Take care. God bless.
Bye.
To hear more and to learn more on how you can make an impact or about the Erin Cruz Show, visit us online at erincruz.com. That's ERINCRUZ.com.